So I started teaching screenwriting when I moved to Australia and couldn't find any screenplays to produce. So there's a special place in my heart for people who are outside Hollywood, whether they're trying to write for Hollywood or whether they're trying to write for their local markets. And so today's episode is with a writer who's not a native English speaker. So there are a couple of little issues that we're going to face along the way. So hopefully you can sort of perk up your ears and pay close attention because there are some amazing insights for writers everywhere. My screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of The Feedback Loop. This is the free deep dive weekly screenwriting feedback series where each week we look at the first 3 pages of a different writer's script, and I review them word by word, page by page, to show you what they look like from the producer's perspective. And the idea is that if you keep coming back week after week after week, you'll start to gradually see the patterns and you'll start to gradually see why the vast majority of screenplays simply don't connect with producers, but why producers are still always on the lookout for great material. My name is Jeff Ballo, and for nearly 20 years, I was a would-be independent producer based out of Sydney, Australia, searching in vain for material. But when I would tell writers that literally 99% of what comes in is not actually viable, that doesn't really help anybody. So my hope with this series is that you'll start to understand why, and maybe we can gradually begin to change that, have this massive sea change where there become a huge array of projects internationally that producers can say yes to. Now, to that end, today's pages come to us from a writer currently based in New York by the name of Noah Elam. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and I hope you'll correct me if I'm not. Noah's script was Untitled, but he called it a satirical rom-com, and Noah is on the call with us. Now, Noah has written his script in English, but Noah's native language is Hebrew. So a lot of what's on first glance, when you look at the script pages, they're not something that a producer would be able to say yes to. But I really wanted to cover them today in this session because I'm a big believer that the world has opened up for screenwriters, for filmmakers. We can literally make movies today anywhere on earth. And because of that, there are independent producers, people like me, people that don't have the money to go out and pay for script development, but who need great quality screenplays that they can go out and make and get noticed with anyway, right? So the problem is that writers are not making use of that. Writers are not creating material producers can say yes to. But what will often happen today, because of the global nature of the industry now, is that you're going to see lots of people in one place writing for another place. In Australia, I would often see American writers trying to send me scripts to just make the characters Australian instead of American. But they're two different cultures, the two different sets of sensibilities, and the types of things characters will be doing will be different in the two different places. So if your screenplay has slang or vernacular or language that is not actually used in that other place, then the script locally reads inauthentic. It reads like something that's not appropriate for us. And I see this a lot with English language submissions written by people outside of English-speaking countries. So people in France or people in Germany or people in Japan, or they'll often write in English language, and just because the vernacular isn't quite right, it's not something a producer could actually seriously consider. So if you want to write for a market other than the one that you're in or other than your native language, it's going to be double imperative to not just learn the craft of screenwriting, but also to understand the nuances of the local language. And so we have a lot of people. I'm extremely enthusiastic about helping writers globally tell local stories. And because of that, I really wanted to address this topic today and see where it takes us. Now, once we're finished talking with Noah about his pages, I'm then also going to turn to what I think is a very inspiring screenwriting story, which is the first 3 pages of the Oscar-winning screenplay, The King's Speech. Now, The King's Speech stands as the screenwriter of The King's Speech is the oldest person ever to win a Best Original Screenplay Oscar. And so if you're thinking that the clock is ticking, if you're thinking that you're too old to do this stuff, hopefully this can serve as an inspiration to you, because at the end of the day, nobody cares how old a screenwriter is. What they care is what's on the page. Is this an extraordinary story that grabs them and pulls them through? If it is, if it's something like The King's Speech, it's going to find its audience. It's going to connect, and it can actually get made. So hopefully this will ultimately be a very inspiring episode for you. So without further ado, grab something to drink, grab something to take notes with, and enjoy this episode of The Feedback Loop. Fade in. Exterior schoolyard day. Children swarm in the yard in front of the old imposing building. Sent to a new school day, the kids spread out in groups and pairs in a restless socialization. Some of them laugh, others just walk or run to the stairs leading to the entrance. Darla, 7, a thin auburn shy girl with thick rimmed glasses and an untidy ponytail, lonely, dodges the crowd on her way out, targeted by ironic glances from her mates. Interior classroom day. Tom, 8, a bully, portly, spiky hair that by Darla's luck sits just behind, passes a note to Ivy, 7, the restless brat in front of her, letting Darla see the line. Insert note that reads, "She looks an owl with that ridiculous glasses, ha ha." Then Darla says loud enough to only Tom and surround classmates hear, "Darla, Tom pissed his pants." Indignant, Tom answers loud enough to many others turn to him. Tom, "I'm not." Darla, "Yes, he did. He chickened out when Mrs. Taylor asked him." This time, more kids got it. Pissed off, Tom stands on his chair and shows his pants. Tom, "Liar, it's dry, see?" Darla, screaming, "He's showing his genitals." Ms. Taylor's ears burn. She stops writing on the blackboard and turns to the class. Ms. Taylor, "Tom, what's going on?" Ms. Taylor shout was the missing sound effect. Now the show is complete. Ms. Taylor, "You're in detention." Right to the principal. Head down, buried in shame, fleshy cheeks red to purple, Tom marches through his Via Crucis in front of the condemning eyes of the crowd. The aloof little girl, the notorious loser, laughs to herself behind the glasses. Exterior schoolyard, later. After school, down the entrance stairs, a gang of 7 to 8-year-old thugs wait for Darla. A girls' group not so far, scarily attracted by the scent of blood, coo a muttering chatter. Darla strides through the hall, making her best to not show fear. Her knees up to falter, heartbeat increases. Adrenaline gives the strength to go ahead, and stamped on her face the notion she cannot avoid fate. She keeps her pace down the stairs. Some of the kids step back due her attitude, but Tom has to be tough and keeps his ground. Before he can open the mouth, Darla decides the best defense is the attack. Darla, "Give yourself a chance they don't expel you." Silence. Darla, "The principal already has the note you gave to Ivy, and my complaint you both bullied me." She smiles mischievously. "I imagine how your parents will react to the letter." Tom's cheeks turn from red to pale blue. Darla stares at Ivy. Ivy, "I didn't know what it was. I'm out." Darla smirks sly. "No, you don't." She keeps staring. Ivy steps aside. Darla marches triumphant to the school bus as the crowd disperses in ominous murmurs. Only Tom stalls with boggled eyes. Narrator, voiceover. That day, Darla learned key principles for her life. A lie, when gets public, becomes truth. Do not waste time when the opponent exposes itself, neither pithy no one. Words are extremely effective to shape reality. Then she decided to become a writer. So, I wanted to read these pages in part because I find the story. I've read these pages now in the. I'm going to pop back on the corner here in an effort to be able to read these aloud to you because there's a lot of things in here that it's not the way English speakers speak or write. Because of that, it's very easy to trip over it. So to be able to read this to you, I've read this over many times, and I've figured out what the intention behind the lines were, so that I could read this through to give you some sense of shape of what the scene is about. And in doing so, I see kind of what the intention of the scenes were, and I think it makes for a potentially great little opening scene. I think it makes for a nice little setup. The challenge, of course, is that all the little difficulties within the language itself, the translation from what was obviously the mother tongue to English, so much is lost in translation because of just not using the right words or phrases. So let me put Noah on the line, and we'll talk to Noah. Noah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. How did you feel with me reading it out?
Excellent. Your reading is better than mine.
My reading's better than yours. Okay, so when I'm reading, so my first question to you is going to be your command of the English language. How strong would you say that it is? Do you recognize in what I read some of the difficulties with how the words are presented on the page?
I actually try to think in English to write, but my thinking is probably a little foreign, And,
so you're trying to think in English in order to write in English, but
yes.
Are you having to make that translation from it's Hebrew, right?
I try to put my mindset in English and to write, but probably subconsciously the English doesn't is put together.
It's not quite there, right? So the gaps, you end up falling back to what is your native language, to Hebrew, right? So the gaps in knowledge. So what ends up happening, and I would love for everyone else to take this idea on board as well. What the gap in what you know makes your brain fall back to, in your case, Hebrew, and then you're making a literal translation. And so the problem is when we read the literal translation, it doesn't make sense. We can sit and figure it out, but it doesn't make sense to the brain on reading it. So it becomes a very...
That's what's happened, because I'm not training my English enough, I'm not talking to much people, I'm not in the streets. I intend to make an intensive full-time course now in New York, we have it, and to improve my English. That is from 9 to 3 o'clock, only English.
Okay.
And
well, so here's going to be my general advice for people for whom English is not your native language. My general advice is going to be to first learn to write in your native language. So to develop the skill to be able to do that, because one of the great challenges of screenwriting is that there is a large element of, and I'm always hesitant when I say this, but let me explain. There's a large element of poetry in screenwriting. There's a large element of choosing just the right phrase to evoke a nuance that that is not as literal as just what we think of as screenwriting, right? So in other words, if you were just to tell us logistically what's happening here, you can do so in very simple words. But because screenwriting has such a limited real estate, because screenwriting is 1 page equals 1 minute, we really do need those little poetic flourishes that are going to help us see more than just the logistics in order for us to care about the story. Now, if English is not your first language, then the challenge that we have is that you're not familiar with those flourishes, or the poetry in your native language, but you don't necessarily know in the language that you're writing in. So how do we go about fixing that? How do we go about improving that? You can go about improving that by mastering that in your native language first, so that you incorporate that into what your brain already thinks in. Or you can spend the time trying to improve your English language and use that as an exercise to develop that skill there. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, absolutely.
How you want to do that is up to you, and it's largely determined by what you want to get out of it and all that sort of thing. But so let me go through some of the pages themselves and talk about. Let me go back through it so that I can sort of be clear on what's happening here. And then we can talk about the logistics of it from a story standpoint and from a maybe poetry standpoint, from a how to present this more effectively. Okay. Okay. So the very first scene we have is the schoolyard, right? So have you been on the previous sessions of the feedback loop? Have you been with us in the previous sessions?
Yeah.
Okay, so you probably know that my whole thing is at the beginning of every story, the reader, as they read your words, is going to imagine where your words are going to take them. So we know nothing as we come into this. So when you say exterior schoolyard day, we really don't have a picture of the schoolyard. There's no setup telling us, sort of setting us up for where we are. When you say children swarm in the yard in front of the old imposing building is, we don't know what the old imposing building is, right? So the first thing that we're going to want to do is establish what the old imposing building is, right? From an English standpoint, we talked about this in last week's session as well. Rather than the old imposing building, it probably should be an imposing building, because we've never seen this building before. If we've already seen a building, we can go, that's the imposing building. If we've never seen it before, we're seeing it for the first time, it's an imposing building. Does it make sense? It's a small distinction, but it's the kind of thing that I want everyone who's on here to sort of understand and think about when you're writing what you're writing. Does it make sense? Okay, sent to a new school day is not a phrase we would use in English. So at first I'm not sure what that means, but I assume you're saying it's morning and the kids are coming to school for the new school day, right? But we don't necessarily say that kids are sent to a new school day. The kids spread out in groups and pairs in a restless socialization. So this word socialization is a literal translation from your mind thinking in Hebrew, right? So it's not. We would never use the word socialization in this kind of a context. We wouldn't call it a restless socialization. We would say the kids spread out in groups and pairs and play restlessly or something like that. So what are they doing? Not what is the logistics of what you're describing. Does that make sense? Or the technical version of it? Okay. So some of them laugh, others just walk or run to the stairs leading to the entrance. Fine. Darla, 7, a thin auburn shy girl with thick rimmed glasses and an untidy ponytail, lonely. Okay, that's I sort of see it. I think we could probably condense this down a bit so that we just have a sharper, quicker picture of her. Lonely is I like the description, but I'm not sure how it fits into the. I like the word, the idea that you're putting in there. I would rather that this description evoke lonely rather than tell us lonely. If that makes sense to you. Dodges the crowd on her way out, targeted by ironic glances from her mates. When you say an ironic glance, this is and one of the reasons that I wanted to choose these pages, even despite the language barrier, is because this is the kind of thing that so many writers do, even those native English speakers. So targeted by ironic glances. I don't know what an ironic glance is, right? Ironic is a word that describes something within a specific context. So something is ironic within context. Just all by itself, a glance is not ironic. And since we don't know what's happening in the scene, we can't pick up on what irony is. So there's another way to describe whatever this glance is. Condescending, maybe, or dismissive, or disgusted, or something. I don't know what you're trying to describe.
Disgusting and dismissive, something like that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Dismissive. Okay, so that's fine. Just be aware that this is the kind. So because English is not your first language, I would in general say that what you're going to want to do is watch out for those big hyper descriptive words, right? Things like socialization or like ironic. We'll get to more as you go along. But words that are, if used incorrectly in a situation, are going to highlight that you don't know what this word means in English, right? Or that you don't understand how to use this word in context. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
So my point is that if you go simpler, if you choose simpler words, if you use a simpler way of describing what's happening in the scene, the idea will come across more clearly and can probably mask some of the language barrier issues. Targeted by ironic glances from her mates. Mates would be a word that we would use all the time in Australia, but probably not in the U.S. You wouldn't. From her friends, or from her classmates. Just her mates is not really something American English would be. So we always have to write for the market that we're writing for. So we always want to make sure that the reader, that this story feels natural in their world, right? So if I was going to write something to send off to Tel Aviv or something, try to make in Israel, I would want to make sure that I have all the local, nuances down and not just. So again,
the idea from the other kids. The other kids looks ironically for her. No, they have a kind of dismissing glances.
Yep.
Something like don't like her much. Don't take her in account as a cool person. Something like that.
So wait, are you saying that these glances here are from friends of hers or are from people who are not her friends?
Other kids in the
Just
school,
the other kids. Yeah.
Just other kids.
Okay. So my point is that words mean different things in different places. And even in English, words that we use in Australia are very different to some of the words we use in the US or that people use in England, right? So if you don't know those subtleties, then the problem that you're going to run into is that when people read your script from a place where that's not the way we would say things, suddenly what it does is just pulls us right out of the story, and we have a very hard time connecting to whatever the emotion of the scene is or whatever it is you're trying to get across in the scene. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So that's the point I'm getting at. I'm not trying to necessarily tell you which words to change it to. I'm telling you overall what the challenges that you face and how to approach the challenge rather than how to fix this one problem or that one problem. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, absolutely.
Okay, so interior classroom day. Let's keep reading. Tom ate a bully, portly, spiky hair. There are no commas in here. So a bully, portly, spiky hair is I think I know what you're saying. A bully, kind of portly, got the spiky hair, right?
Yeah.
But without the commas, the brain goes, what's a bully, portly? Or what's a bully, portly, spiky? Right? Hair, okay.
He's bully, also be in the sense of he's bullying, he's bullying the girl.
No. I understand. I do understand, and I have figured out everything in your story, so I understand everything that you've written. But I want you to understand the challenge, because I had to read this 3 times probably just to understand what I was reading. And then I had to read it. I had to practice reading it out loud about 5 or 6 times before I felt like I could actually read it here on this session, because the words are not the way we speak in English in general. Okay, so the challenge is most readers in the U.S. will simply they'll just no, thank you. There's something else. There's so many options, right? There's so many scripts coming in. There's so many different projects to consider that if we read something that is grammatically or what's the word? The word escapes me. Colloquially incorrect. If we read something like that, it's not that we couldn't sit and figure it out. It's that it's too much work, right? So I sat and figured this out, and I went, this is kind of a nice little scene. There's something here, but nobody else is going to do that. And so that's why the word choice becomes so important. That's why understanding those nuances is essential before sending the work out. Does that make sense? And this is why I want to use this as an example today for everyone else who does speak English, because they can make that connection more clearly and recognize, oh, you know what? I do that very same thing and I speak English as a native, right? So it's a great example to help us see something that's maybe hard to fully grasp otherwise. Okay?
Okay.
So, Tom ate a bully, portly, spiky hair that by Darla's luck sits just behind. So your order of the sentence is confusing, right? So that by Darla's luck sits just behind. So you're saying Tom. So by Darla's luck, Tom sits behind Darla, or Tom by Darla's luck sits just behind Tom, right? So there's a logistics question there which stops the read. And then you say, passes a note to Ivy, 7, the restless brat, in front of her. So I stopped for a minute and went, wait, so Tom is sitting there, passes a note to Ivy, who sits just behind. No, so, right? So, oh wait, so Darla's in the front and Tom's behind? The brat is in front of her. Wait, so I couldn't tell if Ivy and Darla are sitting on top of each other. It doesn't really matter, okay? Like this is the logistics of something that's inconsequential to your scene. My point is that as a reader reading your script, it's confusing enough that it stops the process. So if it's important to understand where the kids are sitting, and I would argue it's not important, but if it is, then we want to do it as simply as possible, right? He sits there, she sits there, she sits there. That's it. We don't need to get clever and twist the 2 sentences together and make it something that is unnecessarily complicated. Okay.
Okay.
Letting Darla see the line, insert note that reads. If you say insert note, you can get rid of this, the hyphen. It's just insert note, and then you just need the colon. If you're going to insert a note, We know we're reading it, so you don't need a note that reads, right? Insert note. Put a space in between here. She looks like an owl with those ridiculous glasses. Okay, so if you say she looks an owl, then we don't know what word's missing. She looks like an owl. She looks at an owl. She looks for an owl. There are three different thoughts, and I know that we can figure it out pretty quickly. But that pause pulls us out of it, and this is the kind of sentence that makes it very clear that English is not your first language. Do you know what I mean? Which is okay, but I want you to see it. Then Darla says loud enough to only Tom and surround classmates here. So this sentence should be, then Darla says loud enough for only Tom and her surrounding classmates to hear, right? So I don't want to go through and fix all these kinds of little things, but this here again is one of those kinds of sentences that make it clear that the little articles, the little to, the, a, and, for, those little tiny words that connect the sentences together are going to be the dead giveaway for anyone who's translating from another language, like you're writing in another language and creating something in English. Those are going to be the things that will jump out at us that this is. So here's the larger problem. If I not necessarily me, but if a reader reads a script where we see these kinds of language problems, then the assumption is going to be, and this is a subconscious thing. This isn't even something that we're thinking about. But if I see that, I'm in my brain on some level, I'm going to think if the person doesn't understand the nuances of the language, chances are the person doesn't understand the nuances of the social interaction, or how school works here, or how things happen in America, right? So rightly or wrongly, that is going to be this quick, subtle, instinctive response. So if we see those kinds of problems, we immediately think this person doesn't understand how it works here. We immediately reject the story idea. I'm not saying it's fair, and I'm not saying that we do it deliberately. I'm saying that as a reader, that's what goes through your head, right? So that's why the little stuff might seem trivial, but it's actually really important. And this is why, for those of you who are watching for whom English is your first language, that's why those little grammatical problems are so important, because they can jump out at you. Imagine if you just miss a to or a the or a for, and all of a sudden your sentence reads like it doesn't make any sense in English, and then the person jumbles out. That you're going to be giving them that same kind of thought as well. So I don't want to focus on that aspect of it too much more, because hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense? The problem. Okay. So let me try to focus on, from here on, let's try to focus on sort of the story and what's happening. So Darla says, Tom pissed his pants. Indignant, Tom answers loud enough for many others to turn to him. I did not. I did not. Not I'm not. I am not means I am piss. Anyway, I did not. Darla says, yes, he did. He chickened out when Mrs. Taylor asked him. Presumably called upon him, or asked him to speak, or like he got afraid, and so he pissed his pants. That's what she's accusing him of, right? This time, more kids got it. It doesn't make sense in English, but what you're trying to say is this time more kids are paying attention, or notice, or hear, or look. Pissed off, Tom stands on his chair and shows his pants, because we need a moment to understand that the whole room is noticing the hubbub and going, wait, did he just piss his pants? We need that. That's missing in this, right? We need that moment of everyone, of realizing that this has become a socially terrifying situation. Tom stands up. Liar, it's dry. See? Darla says, screaming, he's showing his genitals. generally a kid at 7 isn't going to say genitals. They're going to use a kid word. He's showing his doodle or something, right? Like my point is like we want to make sure that we're going to use kid language as well. So Miss Taylor's ears burn. She stops writing on the blackboard and turns to the class. That's okay. Be careful with things like ears burn, because anytime you use an image in your pages that could be read a different way. Burn is fire, right? So yeah, ears burn in the sense that something we have that sort of intuitive sense and we turn around to whatever it is. But when you say your ears burn in a script, we picture ears burning, even just for that 1 second, and we go, oh no, that's not what he meant. Oh, he's being poetic. We don't reading a screenplay, that gets a little intrusive. So Miss Taylor's ears burn. She stops writing on the blackboard, turns to the class. Miss Taylor, Tom, what's going on? Miss Taylor's shout was the missing sound effect. Now the show is complete. I think what you're saying is this is from Darla's point of view, that all that was missing here was her in on this situation, which rounds out the humility for Tom or rounds out the relish joy that Darla gets from causing this mischief. But the way that it comes across was the missing Miss Taylor's shout was the missing sound effect. My brain's going, I do not know what you're saying. Now the show is complete. It took me a little bit to understand this. It took me more than just that half a second of, wait, what's going on? Okay. Instead, it was like wait, what? Wait, no, what? Right? So we have to be very careful about how you describe that. Don't get too poetic. Don't get too overly descriptive with words that mean something else. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so Miss Taylor, you're in detention. Write to the principal. You'd probably word that a little differently. So, like you get detention, or it's right, but it's not colloquial. It's not the way that that a teacher might say it in that situation. Head down, buried in shame, fleshy cheeks, red to purple. I like the description, but it's not how we would write something like that. Anyway, Tom marches through his Via Crucis. I had to look that up. Via Crucis means the Stations of the Cross. So it's a Catholic thing where, Jesus goes through the Stations of the Cross. So presumably you're saying he's going through his own Stations of the Cross, like he's going through the public shaming in front of the condemning eyes of the crowd. So I understand what you're saying, but this is not, I can't imagine any American anywhere writing this phrase or even thinking this phrase, which is not necessarily a problem if we immediately understand it. Like if it's a clever introduction, a clever way of describing something or painting a picture for us that instantly puts that picture in our head, that's cool. But if I don't know what Via Crucis is, what he marches, is that a part of the building? Is that you understand? That's the challenge. The aloof little girl, the notorious loser, laughs to herself behind the glasses. This is you saying that Darla is enjoying the chaos she has created. But because you haven't used Darla's name, this is very easy to read over this. Who's the aloof little girl? Is there someone else I didn't notice? Or are you talking about Ivy? Or are you talking about the notorious loser? She's a notorious loser, but within the context of this sort of social setting, but the reader doesn't know that yet. So I like what you're saying here from a scene design standpoint. I see how the scene unfolds when I take the time to understand it, and I like it, but the way it's being presented is not clear to the reader until they really sit and spend some time figuring it out. Does it make sense so far? How you feeling so far?
Makes sense.
Any thoughts along the way so far?
No, excellent. Touching the points that what I appreciate.
Say that again?
I appreciate that you are really touching the points that
Okay.
I'm
That I
slipping.
that I understood it.
Yeah,
I don't think it's impossible to understand. I think it's anyone who takes the time to figure it out can figure it out, and I think it's nice. The challenge is no one will ever take the time to figure it out, and this is not just true for you. This is true for everybody else on this session. Everybody who's ever going to watch this. It's the essence of screenwriting is to always remember they are never going to take any time trying to understand what you've written. It needs to be instantly clear immediately the first time they read through it. That's the challenge that we face. And
even if I
huh?
even if I have to use obvious things and obvious description to sell that, and not a poetic way to tell it, I have to be more simple, more descriptive, and less poetic, expressive. I don't know.
I'm resistant to say I want you to be less poetic or less descriptive. I think the takeaway instead is we really need to make sure that you understand how an English language reader is going to understand and interpret the words that you write. So it may be something as simple as getting into a writing group and saying, I don't know if these things make sense in English, and then you can sort of talk it through with them, and then they can go, oh, well, actually try saying it this way, or use these words instead. That may help solve the problem a little bit, and so you'll be able to, you'll be able to end up with material that has been vetted by native English speakers, so that when a native English speaker reads it, they're not reading just the pure stuff that came from you. I don't want you to think, I don't want you to remove the poetry of it or the nuance of it, because that's part of, I think, what is going to fill out the scene and help us understand the feelings of the characters and the emotion of the situation. It's just that that's not coming across. And so you need, as the writer, you need to make sure that's coming across. So in general, for everyone, you don't want to send your work out there until you've had someone at least look at it and point out any problem areas, right? So it's for you, it's just that becomes even more important, right?
Sure.
All right, so let's keep going. So exterior schoolyard later. After school, down the entrance stairs, a gang of 7 to 8-year-old thugs wait for Darla. So this literally confused me every single time I read it. I seven. So a gang of 7. I'm thinking number 7, like 7 thugs, right? 7 to 8-year-old thugs.
For me also was confusing.
No, it's okay. Like I figured it out, but each time I tried to read, and as I was practice reading it for the session, it was like I stumbled over it every single time. So anyway, a girls group not so far. This is one of those lines. You're basically saying there's a group of girls close by, but that's not what this. That's a group of girls. A girls group not so far. The English language brain interprets that differently than the way you're thinking about it. Anyway, scarily attracted by the scent of blood. I get what you're saying. It's like, ooh, it's that sense of ooh, it's almost like kids in a playground going, fight, fight, fight. So I understand that that's what you're going for. But as a sentence, a girls group not so far scarily attracted by the scent of blood, coo a muttering chatter. Now, this is too if you can find a way to say that simply and clearly, a group of girls close by, are attracted by the chaos or something. I don't even know that that's necessarily the way to do it, but that's the idea that we want to get across. Don't get too poetic and creative with that unless you know how the nuance is going to come across. Darla strides through the hall, making her best to not show fear, just worded not the way we would word it, but I understand. Her knees up to falter. I still don't know what that means. Heartbeat increases. Adrenaline gives the strength to go ahead. So you're basically saying she's working up the courage to just go for it. Stamped on her face the notion she cannot avoid fate. These are all things that are not really here in this scene. We're not, as a person sitting in the movie theater watching that unfold, we're not seeing heartbeat increase, adrenaline, strength.
That gives instructions to the actress.
Yeah, that's not what we do in screenwriting. It's a great thing that
tell to the actress to gives instructions to the actress.
No, that's not the screenwriter's job. The screenwriter's job is not to tell the actor how to do what they do. The screenwriter's job is to show us what we're going to see on the screen. That's it. So you need to show us what we see. You don't need to show us how they got there. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Important lesson, important point to understand always. Because this is why writers over-describe things, because they're trying to help the actor understand how to get there, or show the cinematographer how to light the shot, or the camera, where to position the camera, or none of that is your job. Your job is to show us what we're seeing as if we're watching the movie.
Okay.
All right, so she keeps her pace down the stairs. That's actually a fine sentence. Some of the kids step back due to her attitude, but I would probably say because of her attitude, but I would also then find a different way to say that, because we wouldn't say any of those things. But they step back because of this attitude, but Tom has to be tough and keeps his ground. Before he can open his mouth, Darla decides the best defense is an attack, or the attack, you could say. But again, these are things going on in the character's head that we're not seeing this decision. But if you can show us, here's the thing: don't tell us what they're thinking. Show us something that when we see the action, she clenches her fist, she puffs up her chest, right?
Yeah.
Then we know she's thinking that, because that action comes from that thought. That's what you want to try to do in screenwriting in general, right?
Yes, right.
So always think about, what am I seeing? Because it's also going to help us understand what's going on more. When we see somebody puff up their chest and go into battle, okay, we see the resolve. You didn't tell us the resolve. We see the resolve on the character's face, right?
Okay.
Cool. So Darla, give yourself a chance they don't expel you. What is that? What do you mean by that?
That's Darla was telling to Tom to not that she's giving you a chance that he would not spell you because he sent the letter. So
almost like save yourself. That kind of thing?
Save yourself.
Admit it now so that you can save yourself. Is that what she wants?
Like that, yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So again, if you run this by a native English speaker, and then they'll ask that question of you, or make sure that they know. Does this make sense? And then
she says him to retreat from what we have done and has done. But
you need to understand that you need to run it through that. And I know that you've sent these in to be reviewed, and I understand that this is not you actually sending something in for consideration. But generally, you're going to want to make sure that you do that before you send it out. Because, look, at the end of the day, readers will only ever get one chance to read your script for the very first time, to see it fresh.
You will be spelled by that.
Yeah, I understand, but don't.
You can't say directly that. No, you'll be spelled.
But don't get distracted by the logistics of this scene. Try to understand what I'm saying about the larger message, because that's going to help you in a wide array of situations. Whereas this one line, you can fix this one line. So
Sure.
anyway, so give yourself a chance. They don't expel you. Silence. So in other words, I think you're saying that Tom doesn't respond. But when you just say silence, we don't know that that's what you're indicating. So silence as a word, a lot of writers love to throw that in their scripts, and that's usually not descriptive enough to help us see what the logistics are of this scene. Darla, the principal already has the note you gave to Ivy and my complaint. You both bullied me. She's laying out her case. I understand that, but there will be a better way to do that. She smiles mischievously. I like that because obviously we know her intention at that point. I imagine how your parents will react to the letter. Again, the intention is clear. The actual wording of it is probably not how a kid like this, at least in America, would speak. Tom, you have to. I'm not sure if you know possessive, but Tom's cheeks, Tom''s. You need the possessive in there when you say Tom's cheeks. Tom's cheeks turn from red to pale blue. Darla stares at Ivy. I didn't know what it was. She says, I don't know what it was. I'm out. Are you saying that she's like, hey, I had nothing to do with any of this?
Yes.
Okay. Because that was not clear to me reading that, but that's fine if that's clear, right? She smirks sly. No, you don't. That's what she's tipping her hand to Tom, or I'm not sure why she says this. I understand that she says, no, you weren't in on it. Hey, look how clever I am that I orchestrated this all myself. But I don't understand why she would be saying that within this scene. You know what I mean? Because she keeps staring, Ivy steps aside, so she's obviously saying this as almost a challenge.
She doesn't have to say nothing. Yes.
Maybe. I don't know. If you don't say anything, then you have all this space right here to write something else that's happening visually that helps it, bang, hit home for us. And we go, whoa, this little kid's evil, or whatever it is that you want us to feel. Do you understand?
Yeah. Okay.
So Darla marches triumphant to the school bus as the crowd disperses. A crowd is a singular, so a crowd disperses.
Okay. Crowd.
Or the crowds disperse. Anyway, in ominous murmurs. Okay, little ominous is a very scary, ominous sort of word. So it feels overly dramatic for this situation. In hushed tones or something, it would be fine. Anyway, it's little nuances like that. Only Tom stalls with boggled eyes. I know what you're saying. You're saying he's like, he has the like dumbfounded reaction, but the phrase is a little odd in English. So narrator voiceover that day. This is what I like though. That day, Darla learned key principles for her life. A lie when gets public becomes truth. Again, the language is not right here, but I understand what you're saying. Do not waste time when the opponent exposes himself, herself, itself. Neither pithy, no one. I did not understand that phrase. Words are extremely effective to shape reality. Then she decided to become a writer. So what I like about this, particularly in the sense of the 3 pages that are going to hook us in, is what you've shown in this scene is a small child manipulating a situation to get what she wants to empower herself. And then you're drawing the parallel between that and her deciding through this moment, I'm going to bend reality to my will by becoming a writer. I think that's a really cool idea for the start of a movie, right? I think we could be drawn into this character. We could care about Darla, even if it's as an anti-hero. We could be drawn into, who is this little satanic kid, right? Like there's a morbid fascination with that kind of evilness. But I think you would need to paint that more in that light, or paint the surrounding situation. So, for example, and now we're thinking story-wise. If we think about you think about the shy girl, we would want to set her up that she's maybe even show something where her shyness is. I mean, it would be too cliche to have someone, smack the books out of her hand and haha, and that would be too cliche. But you want something like that that's going to pinpoint that the shyness is a problem, right? You say she looks like an owl with the ridiculous glasses. Is that enough? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe this should be a little more harsh. I don't know. Again, they're only kids, so we have to be aware of what would be harsh for a kid. And then we need a little bit more of a transition here about, she jumps straight from that into, it's all, the idea is all clear in her head immediately and intuitively, right? He pissed his pants. Let's ridicule him. What if we see her figure it out a little bit, right? So that you take us on the journey a little bit more of how we see the unfolding of the manipulative little kid, right? Like that would be something that would draw us in, I think, maybe a little more powerfully from a reader standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so I like what's happening in this scene. I like the idea of it. The kid tries to defend himself, and then we see that she's manipulated the situation. That's good. We just need to make sure that stuff is clearer. Then when we see this confrontation here, it really is just. There's nothing really changes in this part of the scene, right? The schoolyard scene, right? So she just comes up. She basically says, haha, here's what I did. Here's what I did. Here's why you're screwed. Here's why I'm the master. And then she goes away. We're not seeing the transition. We're not seeing the setup, that conflict, and then the resolution of that situation. We're seeing she gets a little bullied by a note, and then immediately humiliates the kid, and then immediately tells the kid, I've humiliated you. That's fine depending on where the story's going to go, but just as from a narrative standpoint, if we can make that transition a little bit more, if you can take us on that ride a little bit more, I think that's going to come across more clearly. And then when we see that she's decided to become a writer from that incident, then we have more of a connection to it because we saw her transition. Right now, we don't really see her transition. We sort of see an evil person who's decided now to become a writer and maybe use writing for evil. But I think it's just going to be more powerful, particularly as a setup, if we see how she got there.
Okay.
Make sense?
Okay. That's it.
So those are. Do you have any questions or thoughts, or what do you feel about what I've said along the way, or anything specific you want to talk about within this?
I think that you take many points here. You brought many points that
I try.
are important to write. This was my first draft, in the apply phase. I didn't think over that.
Okay, that's fine, and I'm not worried about that. I'm more at the end of the day. I think that this is
really important to the considerations that you put here, because it makes me see more clearly the action and the involvement with the action. I intend the surprise. The surprise of the reaction. Darla's reaction as a surprise, surprise. He pissed his pants.
Yeah.
Oh, man, that's crazy, And she programmed that the guy will be showing his pants, and she programmed that, that she was the surprise was my point.
Yeah, no, that's
to create some kind of hint or environment before. I don't know.
Okay, so look, at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that we need to accomplish within the first 3 pages. There's a lot of things we need to accomplish throughout a story, throughout a screenplay. There's the narrative level of everything. There's the descriptive level of everything. There's how we care about the characters and how we bring the characters into the story, and how the dialogue works, and is the dialogue realistic. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds of things that we have to think about and consider and really master the nuance of in order for the story to land effectively with that reader. So we're obviously not covering everything here, but I want to make sure that the overriding insight. So my thought with this feedback loop series is that if we just do a different script each week, we're not going to do every single note to be done on each of those projects, but we're going to gradually start to see how things work and why things work and how they land. So for yours, just because of the fact that English is not your first language, it really brings to the surface some things that are maybe harder to explain or more subtle in other writers' work. So I really want to make sure that those ideas are clear from going through this, basically. So
Okay.
So I want to thank you very much for sharing these pages with us. I hope that you got something out of this.
Because it was great.
Good. Great. All right. Well, so keep up the good work, and I do recommend in general either to write in Hebrew, for example, and really learn the subtlety and nuance of that.
Particularly, we have a problem with the pronouns. Now, verb to be. We don't have verb to be in Hebrew.
Right.
It's a very different mindset. No.
Absolutely.
I have to adapt myself to the English way of thinking to it before to write in English in place of translating simple.
Well, so this is also, I mean, a lot of languages, I don't know about Hebrew, but a lot of languages have male-female pronouns. And so when writers translate those, for example, from Spanish to English,
that's a problem.
Yeah, so you often notice that they're saying he this or she that.
I say itself because I should put she, he, herself, she's self, but be messy in the text, in the narrator. No, the be messy, be low.
Well, so okay, but right. So, but the point is that the point is that culturally, the way things happen in a culture, in a society, in a different part of the world, it's very much affected by language. Language puts words to what we're thinking. So when you think about how different languages, different parts of the world speak differently, they use different pronouns, they shape their sentences differently, they have different ways of saying things, that actually changes the way people think.
Do you deal with the politically correct she, he?
Yeah, what?
What do you deal with the politically correct she, he? In English, all time you have that problem. No, when you write.
Well, so hang on. Let me make my point first. So the point that I'm trying to get across, which is more important than which pronoun you're going to use, the point that I'm trying to get across is that because different parts of the world speak with different languages, or they speak idiomatically differently or colloquially differently, they say things in different ways, it changes the way we think. And so different parts of the world, different cultures think differently. So what happens is the way a scene plays out, it will play out differently. And this is one of the challenges that writers who are not native to English are going to run into, is because you're writing in English, but the challenge that we have is that's not necessarily how the scene would play out in this culture, right? So understanding how the language works is also going to help you understand how that culture works. And so So as a result, it's not just a matter of translating something, or it's not just a matter of which pronoun to use. It really is a matter of understanding culturally, dynamically, socially, how the different places are going to be. And this is why it's important, not just for you who speaks English as a second language, but also for other writers who do speak English as a first language. We tend not to notice that unless, I mean, I've traveled a fair bit in my life. I've been to different cultures and I've seen how people think differently in different parts of the world. And so that's a part of how I see through things. But if people haven't, and they only know the one culture that they're in, they're maybe not going to recognize that cultural difference doesn't just happen within different languages and different countries, but also within different maybe parts of the United States or parts of the same country that speaks the same language. Does it make sense?
Makes sense, absolutely.
Potentially a very helpful, valuable thing. So as far as the pronouns themselves, there is a historical precedent for when you just need a pronoun to use the he. A lot of people like to mix it up. So sometimes you use the he, sometimes you use the she. But whenever it's about a specific person, it's going to be whatever their gender is. When it's about an inanimate object in English, generally speaking, there's no masculine or feminine pronoun to it. It's an it. Right, so we don't have, a boat is not a female in America, right? It's in English in general. So it's just an it. So if you ascribe, say, feminine descriptive characteristics to it, as you might in a language where a boat would be a she, then it's going to feel weird. It's not going to come out the way that you think it's going to come out. So all that is understanding that dynamic, understanding what that is, right? So that may be learning English, that may be spending more time with it, practicing, getting out into the world, not just spending your time by yourself, but actually getting out there and practicing your English or whatever it may be. So
no, that's okay. I have to spend time. No way.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for sharing these pages. I'm going to mute you again, but thank you, Noah. All right, I appreciate it. One of the reasons I wanted to go over these pages is because it's so much more than just applicable to people who are writing English as their second language, people who are starting in another language and creating something specifically in English, because the nuances of this are across the board. If you're writing, let's say you're an American writer and you're writing something set in New York or Los Angeles, we often think in terms of, well, what's the dialect, or what kind of word choices do they use? And you're going to distinguish the two characters by which word choices they use. Forget about it, going to be the New Yorker, right? But it's not just the word choices. It's not just the language. It's not just the drawl. It's also going to be how they think. A city person versus a country person, they're going to think differently. The scene should probably play out a little bit differently. There's so much nuance and detail that you can bring to that, which can do the job of highlighting your character for you, which can do the job of helping present maybe some of the themes that you're getting at just by describing what's happening on page, on the screen, by understanding how different regions might handle a specific problem. You can reveal more about who the characters are without ever saying something like, well, they bring a New York attitude to them. No, show me the situation that reveals that New York attitude, and that will come across. Does that make sense? Debbie says, forgive me if I missed it, but aren't there services he or people could use to fix most of these issues? I don't know. I know they wouldn't be perfect, but isn't that an available resource? Possibly. I honestly don't know. I would imagine so. In this era, there are certainly going to be places where people will offer to help you with that. There's probably places online. I would just say do a Google search and see if we can do that. But for me, and for the purpose of this session, this group, the feedback loop concept, I don't want to necessarily get too too saddled with the idea of making those translations clear, because that's not, I mean, I'm not sure that the vast majority of people that will watch this will be people in that situation. The reason I wanted to highlight that is because it brings out something that is even more important to understand for people for whom English is your first language, because it will show you what is, it's a way to understand. You can see clearly here the nuance of what he was trying to do and how it kind of used the wrong words to do that. But you can see how you can still get the idea from it. That is something that almost all writers face. So almost all writers have some sentence or their whole screenplay where it's like there's a sentence here and it makes sense to the writer and I see what you're going for, but that's not how to say it, right? So it's that idea. This puts a nice pin on it, makes it obvious and clear to those who speak English as their first language. It's clear, it's obvious, right? But can you see that same level of obviousness in your own work? And usually not, because I see the scripts that come in and they have a lot of these kinds of problems, even from native English speakers. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that was an interesting sort of insight and look into an aspect of screenwriting that maybe we don't focus on enough. Okay, so what I want to do now is I would like to have a look at 3 pages from the King's Speech. Let's see, hang on. So the King's Speech is a movie starring Colin Firth, that a couple of years ago won the, I think did it win Best Picture? Can't remember. But it certainly won Best Original Screenplay. The author is a guy named David Seidler, who has been writing for many years, but this was his first Oscar nomination and win at the age of, I can't remember now, but I think he's in his 80s. And it was one of those moments where it's like, oh, you know what? If you persist at this, you can actually develop this craft, and it doesn't matter how old you are. I always thought that was very inspiring. That the other thing is, as I look over the pages themselves, I think it's a very clear picture. It's a nice way to bring the audience into this story. Now, I think I found online an earlier draft. But this is from the draft that was submitted to the Academy for consideration for the Oscar. So in general, when you're looking for screenplays on the internet, when you're trying to find stuff to show you what screenwriting's all about, you generally want to find the earliest possible draft, because that's going to be the closest to the kind of thing you're writing. If you read a production draft or a final draft or a final shooting script, you're going to be reading something that has a lot more script notes, a lot more production notes into it, maybe more camera angles, maybe more it's been refined, it's been changed. It's not the thing that initially grabbed people and pulled them into the project. Now, it's hard to find spec scripts online because usually they go through some development, and by the time we make it, it's something better. And so don't show anyone the first draft or that early draft. It's hey, look at this beautiful final shooting script. But for our purposes and trying to actually write scripts, early draft scripts, spec scripts, you're going to generally want the earliest possible draft. So I don't know what which draft this is for the King's Speech. I have a feeling it's a later draft, so maybe not quite what was written as a spec. But as a reader, as a writer, you're going to be able to sort of use this to understand how to paint that picture and pull people in. So without further ado, let's jump over there and have a look at the King's Speech. Card, which means a title card. King George V reigns over a quarter of the world's population. He asks his son, the Duke of York, to give the closing speech at the Empire exhibition in Wembley, London. Interior BBC Broadcasting House studio day. Close on a BBC microphone of the 1920s, a formidable piece of machinery suspended on springs. A BBC newsreader in a tuxedo with carnation boutonniere is gargling while a technician holds a porcelain bowl and a towel at the ready. The man in the tuxedo expectorates discreetly into the bowl, wipes his mouth fastidiously, and signals to another technician who produces an atomizer. The reader opens his mouth, squeezes the rubber bulb, and sprays his inner throat. Now he's ready. The reader speaks in flawless pear-shaped tones. There's no higher creature in the vocal world. BBC Newsreader. Good afternoon. This is the BBC National Programme and Empire Services taking you to Wembley Stadium for the closing ceremony of the second and final season of the Empire exhibition. Interior corridor, Wembley Stadium, day. Close on a man's hand clutching a woman's hand. Woman's mouth whispers into a man's ear. BBC Newsreader voiceover. 58 British colonies and dominions have taken part, making this the largest exhibition staged anywhere in the world. Complete with the new stadium, the exhibition was built in Wembley, Middlesex at a cost of over £12 million. The exhibition has attracted over 12 million visitors from every corner of our great empire and the rest of the world. Interior control room, BBC Broadcasting House, day. Technicians in suits, ties, and scientific-looking overcoats, wearing bulky headphones, monitor daunting banks of valves and dials while the reader continues. BBC Newsreader voiceover. Today, the vast stadium is filled to capacity with in excess of 100,000 spectators, as regiments from His Majesty's Army, Navy, and Air Force stand in review. Interior green room, day. Nervous eyes flick toward a tunnel leading to a bright light. Close on Bertie, the Duke of York, second son of the king. He is handsome, sensitive, features look terrified. BBC Newsreader, voiceover. The opening ceremony was the first occasion His Majesty the King addressed his subjects on the wireless. The close of the first season was the initial time His Royal Highness and the Prince of Wales had broadcast. And today, His Royal Highness and the Duke of York will give his inaugural broadcast to the nation and the world. Widened to reveal his young wife, truly an English rose. Elizabeth, time to go. He stares straight ahead, frozen. She gives him a loving peck on the cheek, quickly rubbing off a fleck of lipstick. BBC Newsreader, voiceover. Leading us in prayer will be the Right Honourable and Most Reverend Archbishop of York, Primate of all England and Metropolitan. Now we go live to Wembley Stadium, where His Royal Highness, the Duke of York, will read his message from the King. Cosmo Lang comes up to Bertie, tries to be helpful, but makes him more nervous. Cosmo Lang, I'm sure you will be splendid. Just take your time. The last bars of God Save the King echo down the corridor. Robert Wood, the chief BBC engineer on location, whispers Wood, "Let the microphone do the work, sir." Wood checks his watch. 30 seconds, sir. Bertie braces his shoulders manfully, but without an ounce of confidence, closes his eyes, nods, opens them, and reluctantly goes through the tunnel toward the light, like a prize fighter entering the arena to be greeted by the roar of the crowd. Exterior royal podium, day. Handheld camera, Bertie's point of view. Far ahead, at a seemingly impossible distance, is the huge, intimidating microphone, the only thing between the terrified observer and 100,000 people. Silence falls over the stadium. Overhead, thick, roiling clouds. Bertie approaches, like a death march. Bertie's eyes widen in terror as he reaches the microphone. The red transmission light blinks 4 times, then glows solid red. Bertie is live. Interior control room, BBC Broadcasting House, day. Technicians stare at dials and listen to the hiss of silence. The reader and floor manager glance at each other nervously. Exterior spectator stand, Empire Stadium, day. In the tense silence, pan through some of the crowd waiting with growing discomfort. In particular, we notice a father and son watching intently. Exterior royal podium, day. Bertie is frozen at the microphone. His neck and jaw muscles contract and quiver. And then the next line is actually him saying his very first line and stuttering one sentence in. The reason I love this opening is because it really sets the stage of this. There's no higher creature in the vocal world than the BBC newsreader. we start with the BBC newsreader who has done all of this to ready his voice for the conversation, and it's very pristine and it's very formal. He expectorates, which I had to look up, by the way. It's when you spit out the you spit out into a bowl, sort of like spitting out the gargle. And then the BBC newsreader reads, and it's beautiful and it's perfect and it's flawless and it's sort of golden, right? And the technicians are all getting ready. And then we start to see on page 2 that nervous eyes are flickering, right? We see him and he looks terrified. And we realize that this is going to be his inaugural broadcast to the world. We see that she's there to try to support him. The time is coming. It's like the ticking clock thing. It's this rising tension to this big moment. Cosmo Lang comes up, tries to be helpful, but it just makes him more nervous. We're hearing the music. Somebody saying, let the microphone do the work. 30 seconds. It's just building tension. This is a lot of writers like to do this thing where they want some sort of metaphorical thing to evoke the feeling of a scene, and this scene does that really well. Generally, I advise against the camera instructions, but from this point of view, far ahead at a seemingly impossible distance, the huge intimidating microphone, the only thing between the terrified observer and 100,000 people. You see the silence, you see thick roiling clouds. Why show the clouds? Because it evokes the ominousness of the situation. Approaches like a death march, right? So we could have said he approaches the microphone, but he approaches like a death march, shows us how he's walking to the microphone. His eyes widen in terror. The light blinks on. He's live, but we don't see any dialogue yet. We're going to go, look at the, if we think about 1 page equals 1 minute, this is about a third of the page where we don't see any dialogue. He's live here. We don't see any dialogue through the rest. So we're thinking already about 10, 15 seconds worth of no nothing, which is going to make everybody uncomfortable, right? So technicians stare. They listen to the hiss of silence. Everybody glances at each other. So, the movie is about his speech, which is an upcoming speech. This is when he realizes he's got the stutter and he's going to have to do these kinds of things. So he wants to improve this situation. What a great, simple way to pull us right into the dynamic of this character and in 3 pages. We don't even yet really have the hook of what's going on. But the writer has certainly drawn us into this story and pulled us in a way. Normally, you wouldn't want to necessarily have a voiceover reading. This isn't even a narrator. This is a voiceover telling us about this, broadcasting what it is we're seeing. So we're hearing that as we're watching these different things. We're literally showing, not telling. We're literally watching the situation unfold. And this is a really nice way to pull the reader into a story itself. There's descriptiveness in here. There are some words that may be a little tricky for the reader. I think I told you I had to look up the word expectorate. I wasn't familiar with that word before. The man in the tuxedo expectorates discreetly into the bowl. Here's the thing, though. If I don't know what that word means, I figured it out from the context of the sentence. Right? So we don't want to include those words that people don't understand, but at the same time, by having that word and not spits, we're upping the class of it. We're making the whole thing evoke more than just what the words are evoking. Does that make sense? At the end of the day, the writer's job is to give the reader the cinema experience. So that means starting off with something that's going to take us from knowing nothing about your world to pulling us into your movie, making us want to know what happens next. I would argue that at the end of the 3 pages of the King's Speech, we want to know what's going to happen here. Is he going to fall down and if you don't know the story, and arguably English people will all know all know what this story is, or historians will all know what the story is. But a modern day audience might not know what the story is, so they're not going to know. Does this work out for him? Does this not work out for him? And then what does that lead to? That's it. We don't necessarily have to have the big, giant, hooky, dramatic, explosive type moments to pull an audience into the story. All we need to do is capture their imagination, paint a picture for them, and pull them into the world that we want to tell them the story about, and then keep making it clear so that as they move through the story, it's crystal clear what's happening, why we should care, and why we want to keep reading. So here's the thing. In order for me to read these pages to you, to make it clear, you're going to be hearing these pages for the first time as I'm reading them. So it's important for me to read them clearly. So I spend a little bit of time practicing to make sure that I read them clearly. The reader doesn't have the benefit of that. The reader is just going to be going through the page quickly. So the ideas that are there's a lot of ideas in there are maybe going to get glossed over, are maybe not going to be as clear. People aren't going to read as slowly as I read these aloud to you, right? And that goes for the 3 pages from the different writer each week as well. So we have to be careful. I can make these pages a little bit more clear through my delivery than they will be on first read. So make sure that you don't sort of get dissuaded. Make sure that you don't get a false sense of how clear something is because I've taken the time to make sure it's as clear as I can make it. For your writing, particularly when you write, understand that the reader is going to skim that page. The reader's not going to sit there and linger over every word. They're busy. They've got to get on with things. They want to, what's the story about? If you hook them in, make them want to be a part of your world and make them want to know what's happening next in your story and really give them a writer experience, then they may luxuriate a little bit longer. But those first couple of pages, we have to make sure that we grab them and pull them into that world so that they're going to want to luxuriate in our pages. Does that make sense? So this is one of the hundreds of challenging things about screenwriting and about the craft. When we watch a movie on the page, we have actors, we have sets, we have camera movement. There's a lot that shows us what to look and where, and we don't have to have something described, we just see it. It's there. On the page, all you have are the words. So we need to make sure that those words paint those pictures, pull the reader in, and make them want to keep going. Fernando says, producers look for specific genres. Are they biased from what they like, or you try to look for a story that works and the genre is just a tool? Nope. Every producer is different. So don't think of producers as a type of person, right? Think of producers as think about all the writers on this session right now. Every single one of you is unique, right? You think of the writers in your writers group or in a writing class that you've taken, or I've now met probably 10 to 15,000 writers over the decades, and every single one of them is different. They're all unique. They look different. They talk different. They think different. Their ideas are different. They come up with different stories. They tell those stories in different ways. Similarly, producers. So some producers are going to be very genre focused. There are some producers that I only want to make horror films, or I only want to make action films, or I only want to make sci-fi films, or whatever it might be. Other producers are like, yeah, I don't know, I'll make whatever. Let's see what you've got. Some are going to be focused on budget level. Some are going to be focused on genre. Some are going to be focused on films that could be the actor could be played by Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt's production company is probably going to look for projects that would be suitable for Brad Pitt, right? So it's not what the genre is, what the budget level is, may not be the most important thing for those producers. So always think of, when you're writing, you don't really want to think of how do I write something for a producer. unless they're paying you to write for them. In general, my advice always is write the story you're passionate about. Write the story that drives you, because that's the thing that's going to get you through the work of actually that process of going all the way from idea to story to screenplay to refined screenplay to page turner screenplay to feedback to all the way to the sale. If you're not passionate about it, if it's not a story you want to tell, something that's in sync with your worldview, your opinions, your perspective, the uniqueness that you bring to it, then you're going to give up some point along the way, or you're going to be disheartened when a producer somewhere goes, yeah, I'm not really into that. It's like, what? I spent all this time working on this for you. If you're not passionate about it, then that connection will have a hard time happening. Once you develop it, once you create it, then it's about finding those producers that are in sync with you and making sure that you can sync up what I call align to their immediate needs. So I wouldn't necessarily say to think in terms of that, Fernando, of looking for a story, of making it. The genre is going to be important because the genre is going to help us figure out how to market the thing. So if you're writing let's say you've written a character drama or a romantic comedy or something like that, but I'm only interested in making horror films, which, by the way, is not the case for me. But if that was the case, then the genre would matter and it would filter it out. But then you just go find someone who wants to make the romantic comedy, right? Like, don't or write a horror film with the idea of one day connecting it with the producer that wants to make horror films. That make sense? Hopefully does that answer your question? Are they biased by what they like? So maybe, possibly, but again, I think it's really a matter of who's. Everyone's going to be biased by their likes and dislikes, right? So I'm not interested in making horror films myself. So you could write a fantastic horror film, and I can recognize it as a fantastic horror film, but it's not going to matter. I'm not going to necessarily make it. Am I going to be biased by it and go, oh, this is just disgusting? I'm not going to say it's a terrible script because I find horror films repulsive or what, like that. That's not going to be the reason. Yeah, I can recognize a project as being a quality project or not a quality project. And I think most producers or people who've been doing this for a long enough time, people in the development world, will be able to recognize quality even if they don't particularly respond to that type of film. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. So the key, besides having a great script, is like finding the producer that get you. Yeah, sort of. It's sort of like finding the producer that gets you, but it's also it's understand. I really believe that you're not going to sell a screenplay until you and a producer are aligned. So in other words, it's the story that you want to make, that you're passionate about, that satisfies your innate creativity, but that is also something that a producer can use and that they like and that they would want to make. So let's take as an example the pages that we just saw today from Noah. On the surface of it, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that. I don't know that I would personally necessarily want to make a story about an evil girl, but then again, I don't know what the whole story is. So maybe it's a great story, right? Maybe I could make that, right? But the stories that I'm generally interested in are sort of big picture, life affirming, maybe some sci-fi weirdness to it or something, but something that really gives us that optimistic view of the future. That's my thing, right? So if you're not about that, or you want to make horror films or what have you, then there's plenty of people out there that are willing to make or interested in making those kinds of stories. So don't chase a producer, chase the craft. Chase your ability to do what you do well, so that your voice becomes unique, your voice becomes powerful and original. And when you do that and your craft develops, you'll end up creating material that producers can actually say yes to. Debbie says, speaking of craft, you mentioned character drama. Could I ask whether you always need an external achievable goal for these types of stories? Is that something you'd necessarily expect? Okay, so I'm going to look. There are no rules. There's no the beauty of creativity is that there is no right or wrong. One of my catchphrases is there's no right or wrong. There is only effective or ineffective. So you can't say that a story is right or a story is wrong, right? Or he did the first act, second act, third act just perfectly. That's a perfect story. No, it's either effective or ineffective. You can make a story that hits all those formulaic plot points and just doesn't work, right? It's just ineffective. So does the character need an external goal? Doesn't need one. You could make a story that violates all those rules, and it's still powerful, and it still really affects the audience. Generally, though, as a rule of thumb, I'm going to say that you're probably almost always going to be served well by externalizing the goal or having an external goal. Now, the reason for this is because an external goal gives us something outside the character that the character will pursue, will go after. And in going after that goal, the character will come face to face with their internal flaws or their internal needs, the thing that they need to learn or change, or the way they need to grow through the course of the story. Stories in general, I'm doing sort of a really quick sort of screenwriting course. The stories in general, a character starts one way, goes through a series of events, and ends up changed in some way. And that change conveys the meaning of the story. So how they change, what that means for the characters, how other people respond to that. That's how we see what the meaning or what the point or the purpose of the story is or was, right? So if you say that a character has to go through some sort of change, if it's all internal and there's no external goal, there's nothing the character's doing, it's just we're watching them gradually change, it might not be as visually dynamic, it might not be as engaging of a story. Because remember, particularly in movies, particularly TV, particularly the audiovisual media that we're talking about, we're pointing a camera at something. And because we're pointing a camera at something, we want to see something happen. So generally by taking whatever if you say that the character needs to go from being a loner to being super confident, and we want to know that all confidence comes from within, right? Let's just say that's the message of your story. Then if we just have the character drip by drip through the story gain confidence within their school or something, right? Then it's not, okay, yeah, well, we saw the change, yeah, it's cool. But if we thrust the character into a situation that they're not prepared for, something that they have to develop the confidence in order to achieve the thing or to prevent the thing or whatever, then we have a way of taking this internal growth and putting it out here in front of us so we can watch it. And that's really what movies are about. That's really what TV story is about, is about watching characters go through situations to see how characters change or relate or interact or what have you. And so that is going to convey the change more succinctly, more viscerally, more dynamically, more tangibly. So it's not just some essay, but it's actually a narrative. And so that, I would say, in general, is why we want to make goals external and achievable. And it doesn't mean they have to achieve the goal, but by making it external, it gives them something to do. So by doing that, I think you make your story stronger. I think you make your, I think it gives the audience something to connect with and to experience, right? So if you're just giving somebody a mental internal experience, then we're not necessarily it's not necessarily going to be as visceral. Hopefully that makes sense. Does that make sense? Anyway, let me know. So yeah, hopefully that's clear. Okay, cool. So without further ado, this session went a little bit long today, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you guys like what we're doing here? If so, please be sure to submit pages. This is going to be a limited run series if you don't submit pages, because we're going to run out of pages soon. And so if we run out of pages, there's nothing to go over. The show stops. So visit thefeedbackloop.co/submit. Submit your pages. Be brave. Be bold. I'm a nice guy, or nice enough anyway, so I can help you identify things. And if you have specific questions about the pages, if you have something specific you want to discuss or talk about, hey man, the floor is yours. Let's talk about it. So other than that, join us next week, Tuesday, 3 p.m. We'll see you live then. Thanks for watching this week, and keep on writing. And thanks again to Noah for being brave and sharing your work.